Good morning, Kansas City. Welcome to another fun episode of what we've been calling Life After KCPS. I am excited this morning to be joined by someone I've known for quite some time. And when we start thinking about after KCPS, I always mention that I'm one of those people that went to KCPS and have, told my story some. But what's fun is that this young woman here was also on my bus. And I think I interviewed a person in the past, Christian Heaton, who was also on our bus.
Mm-hmm.
He's now an executive producer and works on like Lego Masters and Domino Masters and those kind of TV shows.
Oh,
And he was on our bus with us too, right?
okay. We must have a talented bus.
We had a very talented bus. So I am joined this morning by, I believe, Dr. Erica Hernandez-Scott. And she is a graduate of Lincoln College Prep, as was I remember, and we were in the same year, correct?
Yes.
We graduated.
It's been 25 years.
Goodness gracious, quite a while ago, but so that would place us in 1996. So I'm going to ask her to kind of wind us back to 96. Tell us what you remember about what was special in 96, and then kind of your path that started to come from, I guess, the moment you walked out Lincoln Prep and went out into Kansas City and found your place. So take us back there, if you could, for 1996. What do you remember about those days as we were kind of calling it quits for high school?
Well, I remember I was kind of a late bloomer when it came to most things that kids did in high school. So I didn't learn to drive until like right after we graduated, in like weeks before I was supposed to be driving myself to college. So I was like, oh, I better learn how to do these things, right? Because it wasn't a big deal for us to like ride the bus or anything like that. So I didn't feel any strong urge to do some of those things. I think the thing that, you know how sometimes you like people, there's this narrative of like, you're not ready for college, you're not a strong enough student. I wouldn't say that was true. I felt like I had read and written so much in high school that my transition academically wasn't difficult. What I wasn't prepared for in college was like the stratification of races. So we went to Lincoln, and Lincoln, black, brown, white, we were all in school together. We had teachers of color who'd been there for a long time, and who touched on some of those issues that we're still dealing with now. And so I went to college kind of naively thinking people my age are kind of in a post-racial society. Like people my age aren't racist. And then I got to college and I was like, that's absolutely not true. Uh, so I wasn't prepared for the being mixed in with other groups of people who didn't go to public school, who didn't ride the bus, who had never been around people of color. And I would say that the gift that we got from KCPS was that we left high school knowing white people didn't have to be racist. I thought people of color were smart, were driven, were capable of having like really sought after careers and being executives and things like that. So my world, I didn't have to start into the world of adulthood being learning that was possible. I knew it was possible. I just was really faced with the other people's reality. So that was hard, but also I feel like I've been chasing that my whole life. Like my whole path has been chasing, like, I wonder if we can get back to how it was when we were at Lincoln, when we were all together, and like intelligence was valued. There's like a real anti-intellectual thing going on right now that I know doesn't have to be that way, because I had a whole lived experience for many years at Lincoln that wasn't like that.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear you retell that. And I share that same sentiment. I went off to private college, having gone primarily to public school. And was shocked in a lot of ways to be reintroduced to people that maybe I didn't really want to be reintroduced to, or couldn't imagine they were really in such great number. And I found that I stood out and often took on advocacy or
Mhm.
allyship with people immediately by joining this really small, secluded, kind of rural experience. And it was equally kind of surprising. And
Mhm.
I relish in what Lincoln Prep was then. I hope I'm not seeing it with like whatever they call like, um, rose-colored glasses. I'm sure there were some things back then that weren't quite perfect, and we were still
Mhm.
addressing those in class. But yeah, as a student body, we were really perhaps trying to be more ahead of things instead of behind them. So
Mhm.
really like that lens myself coming out. Okay, so that painted us an awesome view of the richness and the depth that was Lincoln Prep then and is still now.
Mhm.
Um, Take us to kind of the days after that. After you're coming out, it sounds like some of those things pointed you toward what you went on to do.
Mhm.
How did that occur? Like, where did you go? What did you pursue in college? And
Mhm.
kind of how did you know that that was your path?
Well, I mean, starting in high school, I did, like you have a couple hours where you're like, I'm working in the library, or I have like a personal study hall or whatever. Some of those hours, teachers were like, can you tutor this person in math? Can you help this person in writing? And so I was always kind of, nerdy. I liked learning, I liked reading, I liked writing. And so that just kind of solidified I want a career in teaching. And I went to a small private college for my undergraduate. And there, I took up elementary education, so I was going to be an elementary teacher. And I told you I was like faced with all of these people who just did not um, value a diverse learning experience. They weren't. I mean, I was actively told by faculty not to take jobs in KCPS, like, which is horrible, right? So you're
I
discouraged
did
from
it.
doing that by the people.
I was told the same stuff.
Yeah.
And at that time, even at UMKC, which is our neighboring kind of university where I was going to school, were telling me it's not really a good idea. It's not a good move. And I couldn't help but wonder, like, how are we ever going to help then? And we're right
Hmm.
next door. Isn't that part of why we are planted in the same community,
Hmm.
to work on shared goals? And I can't believe that that was only 20 years ago or so,
Hmm.
but there's a lot more studies going on now. There's an urban education wing. So thank you, UMKC, for finally listening to the need for that. But it was only 20 years ago where I don't think there was much of that at all. So
No. And in many places there still isn't.
yeah,
So I taught in Hickman Mills because I was steered that way from faculty, but was never never quite got over the idea that like somebody would tell me not to be of service, right? Like, I want to be of service. And they're like, no, you don't want to do that. So I taught in Hickman Mills, which were, they were like, oh, well, that's kind of like Kansas City, but not as bad, whatever that means, right? So I taught there for a while, and saw, you know, very Hickman Mills in the 90s had been all white suburban for a while. And then they were going through white flight when I got a job there, or they were kind of in the middle of it. And I saw what happens to kids and families when educators aren't ready for that transition. And so that was a motivation for me to like, why are things like this? Why are people yelling at kids? Why are kids running away from school? Why are families, upset with how they're being treated? Why are teachers upset with how they're being treated? And so I went to UMKC for a master's in multicultural urban ed because I wanted to understand why things were the way they were. And after learning that, I would say that was like the second, like having my public education was one, my experience as a teacher in a almost urban school was two, but having grown up in urban schools myself, and then taking that actual study at a master's program, like let's name this, why is this like this? Before I finished my program, I knew I was going to need to leave the classroom to produce the change I wanted. And so soon as a year before, the year before I finished my master's, I left the classroom to be an instructional coach. And as soon as I finished my master's, I was hired into UMKC to work in their Institute for Urban Education. So I went from being the urban student to the urban teacher to now I'm helping um, kids like me from the community become urban teachers and go back into their community. So we were no longer discouraging them from being of service where you're from, but actually trying to make that transition smooth. I did that for, see, 8 years. 8 years. At the same time, like the beauty of working in higher ed is there's an expectation that you're gonna get a doctorate. I mean, if you at least want to stay, right, you needed to get a doctorate. So I started on working on one for a long time and finished and did research on what it is like to be a Latina educator in urban elementary schools, and asked, instead of talking to teachers about all the things that get in their way, I wanted to study success. So you're an urban teacher, you went back to your community, what worked? How did you do this? What helped you? So what if we can understand what's possible, then we can name it and then build systems of support for other educators to do the same. And then that's what I've been doing. So I did that at UMKC. I did that at Evergreen State College here in Washington. Did it at the University of Memphis. And now I'm back here in the state of Washington as I guess I'm a government employee. I work for the Professional Educator Standards Board, and we are the body that monitors and regulates preparation programs, uh, teacher licensure pathways into the profession for the state of Washington. And still, all this time, all the way along this career ladder, I've been trying to figure out what advocacy looks like along the way.
Wow. It's really rich. And I appreciate so much hearing the story of another educator that was on the same bus, and the path that you took, and how, I mean, we knew of each other, but I don't think we've ever talked like this to
No.
really touch base. And it means so much to hear other people's path. But when you hear the story of another educator, all the lives and all the people that you have touched and influenced and over, so many years. And it's so awesome. Thank you so much for, explaining how you kind of knew the next move, and listening to your heart and listening to your, I guess, your decision making about how to make more difference. That's something I've really been trying to play with in my own career path. And it's so hard to leave the class because that's where you make so much difference, and you immediately feel it, and it receives, back into your soul. And some of these other roles are a little bit harder. Tell me, how do you keep the passion that you had when you were in the classroom, and how do you remind yourself that I'd steal that strategy from you? I'm not that I'm running out. I'm so full of education and love for that I don't think it would ever run out if I did this for 100 more years. However, you do have to be strategic, right? You have to remember to fill yourself and remind yourself the good that we do, so that we keep doing it. Do you have any strategies like that have kept you passionate, devout, centered on the right things?
I think spending time with teachers and anytime I can be near classrooms, right, to hear from students. So for example, right, like I'm in a government job. If I wanted to work in an office all day, I could.
Right.
And but one of my colleagues works with pathway programs, and she does webinars. She helped put together these webinars during the pandemics because students were still exploring the teaching profession, but they didn't have access to people. And so she's like, Erica, you were a teacher. Would you like to do one of these webinars? Yes. So I say my default is yes. I say yes to things that get me close to teachers. I say yes to things that get me close to students. Even if what I'm hearing is like about how challenging our profession is, I want to keep my ear to the street and be as close to that as possible. And I use in my language when I talk with people, because there's a real danger as you advance in your career to chase titles and to chase salary, for it to corrupt you, right, as you
Right.
advance. And so I've kind of adopted this saying when I'm talking to people, like, I work for children, families, and educators. Like, that's who I work for. And when things get hard, or like the ethics of something feels strange, or if I'm unsure what to do, I will think aloud and say those things, like, how does this help educators? How does this help families? Is this the right decision? Do we have what we need to make this decision? What do we need to learn to make this decision? And I don't think what that centers me. And sometimes I think uh, it vicariously centers other people, where they might be focused on something else. And I'm like, hey,
Mhm.
let's recall uh, why we're here.
Mhm.
Which can be annoying for other people if they have an agenda. But I also think that's what my advocacy is, right? Is like making sure that the agenda that I'm on is about advancing the profession, about serving children and families. And um, that can be hard to do, to hold on to not have your moral compass be corrupted
Absolutely.
by the things that happen out there.
Absolutely. Well, then let's do this, because it sounds like all kinds of great examples and suggestions and experience. If you're listening, students, of kind of following your path, but then knowing what to do as you keep trying and you keep growing. But let's think in terms of education, because we need
Mhm,
more educators. And one of the things that we're trying to do is kind of awaken people to the awesomeness of the career. Also, definitely the daunting challenge. What
mhm,
would you tell some young people out there who are considering a path that might involve education?
mhm.
What would encourage them to want to do that? And I know what would encourage them to want to do that. Like, come follow me for a couple days when I was 25
Oh,
and see what kind of life and experience I had and
mhm,
what stories I had, that I would come home from work and tell my fellow worker
mhm,
bees out there in America about what I did today. And they would shake their head and say, I tricked three people into buying something, or
uh-huh,
I sold a mortgage today that no one could afford, or and they would almost cry and tell me, like, I can't believe that's what I do every day. And I would tell them, oh my God, I got to hear 4 poems today. And
mhm.
the student poured his heart out to the class, and it was so unbelievable. And then, I met a couple parents that I needed to. And just, so what do you think? I mean, I remember those with such compassion and love for
Mhm.
doing it then. It's hard to walk somebody straight into the career and say, here, look, it's so fantastic. But looking back on it, it certainly is. What do you think would draw some young people to this path? Or why do we need these young people in our path?
Mhm. Well, I mean, I think the thing I love the most about teaching was that I don't know, it just felt like being in the middle of a sitcom all the time, where it's just like, what shenanigans are going to happen today?
Right.
And while you're doing that, like, kids are learning to read, and like, oh my gosh, I can read this for the first time, or they're excited that they figured out how to do something on their own, or they were able to build, a robot out of scraps of things. And so there's this you know I don't know if you ever been to you've been to Kaleidoscope at
Oh
Crown
yeah.
Center, right?
I was lucky. My grandma was one of the volunteers at Kaleidoscope when I was little, and so not only did I go to Kaleidoscope, I get to, like, live there sometimes when they were cleaning up. Or I learned a lot about Kaleidoscope. So
So being a teacher is like being at Kaleidoscope all the time. Or
yeah.
like there's like chaos and a mess and glitter, and there's like joy and crying, and somebody probably pees their pants, and it's okay, right? So if you are um if you like being around other people and helping them, there's this thing about working with children. And I was an elementary teacher, right? And you worked with adolescents, but there's this thing about working with people who are still like youth,
Hmm.
where the amount of development a person can have in a single year in their life is amazing, right? Like kids can go from I don't recognize letters to now I can read. Like that's huge.
Mhm.
And you could be the person who like makes them want to do that.
Mhm.
You could be the person who helps like shape the trajectory of an entire family or community based on how you treat kids in the classroom. And like we hear a lot of stuff about like, oh, teachers aren't respected enough or they don't pay them enough. Absolutely, that's absolutely true. And
Very true.
you can make a life as an educator. You
Mhm.
can have a home, you can have a car,
Mhm.
you can have sick day. Like so unless your ambition is to like really be wealthy,
Mhm.
you can live well
Mhm.
as a teacher.
I agree. And I remember them telling us there will always be education. Some of these jobs may change, but they're never going to find a way to replace the system altogether. And so
No.
they will always need teachers, and we'll always need people who want to be teachers instead of
Mhm,
people who, don't want to be teachers trying to find something to do for a living. The
mhm,
most fantastic teachers are those who probably want to be there, right? Like
mhm,
full power, and not just dreamt it, but really made it happen and learned about the
mhm,
craft and learned about the practice and respect it and look up to that craft too. So we know you're
mhm.
out there, and we know we need people in our schools, that came from our schools, and we're
Mhm.
sitting on the bus together maybe a long time ago and didn't even think about how
Yeah.
how they would go off into this world, but do things from the same bus but in totally different paths and have an awful lot of impact. So let's do this. Final thoughts you would give some young people out there. It's been a tremendous interview. I hope everybody's been listening and
Mhm,
really thinking about the wealth of knowledge that Dr. Hernandez-Scott has been sharing with us. She is, branching out across this whole country and speaking places. She's also going to be with us helping our teachers get ready for a new Latinx heritage and history class. And honestly, it's so fun to be an educator and know other educators because you get to call
mhm,
on each other in these moments of need, and know that who you're calling on is really a great selection, not just a link I found or a bio I picked out, but someone I literally knew from the past who's going to come be part of this mission with us. So get ready, teachers and students. You might hear from Dr. Hernandez-Scott a little more this year. But tell us as we're going out the door, just some advice for some young people that you think they might need to hear after these wild years that we've been having,
mhm.
just to kind of get recentered and think about their futures. And we'll make that the kind of closing thoughts as we go out on this wonderful Life After KCPS on Real World Learning Friday. What do you
Mhm.
think, Dr. Hernandez-Scott? Just a little gem of wisdom as we're going out the door.
If you are dissatisfied with the experience that you're having, then you're the person who is best suited to help make it better. So if you're in school right now and you're like, ugh, I don't want to, this school is terrible. I don't want to be in school anymore. You might be the person we need to help make it look different than it does right now. And there are people who want you to do that. So use your voice and identify people who can be a mentor to you. There are two people right here on this call who are interested and invested in you joining us, and we don't even know who you are. So all you need to do is reach out and let yourself be known, and you're already going to be a part of a community of change. So, if you're dissatisfied, if you're like the pandemic was terrible, I don't ever want to do it this way, come join us. We don't want to do it this way anymore either. We're happy we're happy to have more people on the team to do that, and it can be satisfying. Like I believe at the end of the day I rest well, not because the work is done, but because I know I'm doing my part. And if you are interested in being part of something larger than yourself that gives back to your community, that that could be transformative for 7 generations after you, this is the way to do it. This is one of the most rewarding professions that you could be a part of, and it needs to be growing with people who are willing to do the work.
Fantastic. All right. If that didn't talk you into it, I don't think anything will, or maybe something will. So please, if you're interested, keep researching and reading and finding new ways to learn about the profession and the people who, we're seeking to find. If you're interested in Kansas City, I know of a program called Teachers Like Me that is run by Dr. Trinity Davis and is actively seeking teachers who may better represent the student population of their schools. And if that is something that you consider as interested, get a hold of Chris Odam at Kansas City Public Schools, and I will make sure I get you into the right pathway and help you find more information yourself. But Dr. Hernandez-Scott, thank you so much for being with us today. These are the most fun interviews to do. It's always so unexpected, and there's no time I've done one of these that there's not just a wealth of information that pours free from people, and this has been no different. If you're interested in having this experience, we might say that we're starting to do these interviews again, and KCPS is actively, through me and through some other means, seeking to tell the stories of the graduates of our programs so that people both believe they have wonderful stories as well as those that we hear that aren't so wonderful, but maybe also so that we could start thinking about where people are going, giving examples and other opportunities to consider options as we're in high school. High school sometimes feels like we're really just trying to become like one thing, and then suddenly the door is wide open afterwards, and so many more opportunities come flooding in that we might ever perceive. So Dr. Scott has given us another pathway you might consider if you're an educator to be, or you're thinking of some other path. Believe me, find out more about it by researching, and people like me or people like Dr. Scott are just eager if you want to reach out to them. So thanks again, Kansas City, for another wonderful day out there. And we'll call it good. Have a great day.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.